Welcome to another edition of Comics Grinder, and this is a very special treat. Nick Thorkelson, we're going to discuss his new book, Herbert Marcuse, Philosopher of Utopia, a Graphic Biography. Thank you so much, Nick, for doing this little interview. And we're just going to cover some highlights for the casual reader, because we're trying to bring in as many possible readers. In a nutshell, Herbert Marcuse is a philosopher who is at the forefront of 20th century philosophy, and in a nutshell thesis, if I was doing an elevator pitch, he is striving for a utopian philosophy. Can you, so philosophy resonated with the student uprisings of the 1960s, and he goes back to the uprisings of 1919. Can you give us a nutshell definition of what he was about?
Well, first, thanks, Henry, for the chance to do this. And thanks for your book, which I had not seen before today, which looks marvelous. I'm glad you said elevator speech. There was my elevator speech, which Leonard Reifus, my comics colleague and friend, reminded me of the other night, was while we were developing this project. Herbert Marcuse was the true revolution man whose principled utopianism remembers freedom. And the parts of each part of that sentence is crucial to understanding him and the way we talked about him in the comic. In 1919, he participated in the Spartacist uprising in Berlin that was the outcome of the disaster of World War I and part of the revolutionary wave that swept Central and Eastern Europe, beginning with the Russian Revolution in 1917. In 1919, the soldiers' councils, he was in the army during the war, were part of this rebellion, and he was sent to return the fire of the proto-fascist militias in Berlin. And that's the first of actually more than two heated moments of great hope and great disappointment. 1968 being the other bookend, but the rise of fascism and the necessity for Jewish intellectuals and many others to flee from Germany, which Marcuse did with his colleagues and came to America. And that whole very dark moment on coming at the crest of a lot of political activity that seemed hopeful. And the end of the war, when it was clear that the anti-fascist forces were going to win, and people like Marcuse, especially refugee activists and intellectuals like him, expected a much more democratic and much more humane outcome from that coalition of forces fighting the fascists. So 1933 when Hitler came to power, 1945 when the war ended, and then 1968 when young people were in motion and discovered Marcuse's writings and treated him as a hero. I'm not sure I agree with you that he's considered in philosophy circles at this point a preeminent philosopher of the 20th century, but he was certainly the most popular of any philosopher during his lifetime. He would, when he spoke, it would be standing room only and people hanging from the rafters trying to hear what he had to say. I have a number of friends who went to Brandeis, where he had his first academic job, solely to study with him. He was popular in a way that's kind of hard to imagine, for complex reasons, which the book tries to unpack. But in a nutshell, he unlike many people of his generation and his experiences and his criticisms of capitalist society, he embraced this new spirit, including the counterculture to a certain extent, and certainly including the highly utopian zeitgeist of the 60s rebellions. So that's an elaborated elevator speech.
I love that. Well, just following with that trail of thought, for somebody who's a young person who's going, well, how does this fit in with Bernie Sanders, or how does this fit in with our zeitgeist today? What would you say to that?
This is certainly a time of great disappointments and great hopes. Somebody pointed out to me the other day that we now have 2 socialists in the U.S. Congress, and that has not been true for 100 years. So something has changed. People are willing to, at the same time that people generally recognize that we all have to get together, and this is one way in which it resembles 1945, and we all have to unite against the threat of, I don't think it's too strong a term, neo-fascism. This book is here to tell you that you keep your eyes on the prize. We don't just want to resist evil. We want a better life. We're sick of so many things. Don't get me started.
Well, it's a tricky balancing act, because we're talking about Marcuse, but I also want to talk about the actual book itself.
Yeah.
So maybe a good way to dive into that is if you could tell us how Paul Buhle approached you, and what was involved with that to get the book off and running.
So Paul Buhle and I have been friends since the 60s. We were graduate students at the University of Wisconsin. He started his first journal, Radical America, and I did drawings for it. We had a lot of friends in common who worked on the underground paper there, which was my main focus. In later years, after Paul left Radical America, I joined the editorial board, and about 12 years ago, he'd been talking a lot and writing a lot about comics and politics from when I first knew him, but he decided around the time he retired from being a history professor at Brown that he wanted to create comics. He wanted to bring comics into being, and the first one he did was on the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Industrial Workers of the World, and I did 2 pages for that. I contributed to other anthology comics he did, often in collaboration with Harvey Pekar, whom your viewers, I'm sure, know that name.
Yeah.
And I got to meet Harvey, which was quite a thrill, and he actually complimented my cartooning, which was a super thrill.
Oh.
And he passed on, as you know, and perhaps because the anthologies depended on his cachet to find a publisher and an audience, but also because Paul got interested in this idea that upcoming people who are coming around to a radical view or a socialistic view of things need to believe or need to know that there have been exemplary thinkers and leaders in the past, and he did a graphic biography of Emma Goldman with Sharon Rudolph, a hero of the feminist branch of the underground comics movement. He did a graphic biography of Isadora Duncan with Sabrina Jones, who comes out of the World War III collective. She's still active in that publication. And a comic graphic biography of Che Guevara, which Spain Rodriguez wrote and drew very near the end of his life, and these are all really terrific books. And the book that inspired me a lot when I was working on Marcuse, one of the most recent, was Red Rosa, a very striking comics biography of Rosa Luxemburg. Excuse me.
Well, I admire you braving through the leaf blower, and that's one of the banes of urban existence. I don't know if there's been any philosophical writings on that, but there should be.
I didn't even notice.
That's the one thing that people viewing this video will fixate on. Well, how could they talk over the leaf blower? So let me stop here for a moment, and but if we don't continue, let me thank you. But I think let's pick it up if we can. So we're continuing with our just an informal chat, and I wanted to ask you, Nick, if you could tell us what you think would be the ideal reader for Herbert Marcuse.
It was our hope in putting this together. When I say us, I'm talking about me and my two editors, Paul Buhle and Andy Lamas, that we would bring Marcuse's ideas and our ideas about his importance, the importance of his ideas in his life, to as many people as possible, very much thinking of younger readers and younger activists. It's my experience that because parts of the book try to unpack some fairly complex ideas grounded in philosophy and politically the serious study of politics and philosophy and society, that it's going to be, no matter how much I'm able to clarify or illustrate, turn into metaphors, these ideas, that those sections will be intimidating to a lot of people. And in fact, my siblings refuse to work their way through this book, so and they're not, these are smart people, so I think, yeah, there's going to be some people that are not going to be inclined to work through it, and I would like to say to people who pick it up and think it might be interesting, who have that experience, that just as with me trying to read Marcuse and his colleagues and understand philosophy when I have virtually no philosophical training, if you have that experience, I urge you to skip that part that's bugging you and go on, because it's a very colorful life. There's a lot of digressions about the counterculture of not just the 60s but the 70s, which had its own counterculture, and the lives of very significant people that intersected with Marcuse. Above all, Angela Davis, who was his student and whose cause Marcuse championed when she was in trouble. But plenty of other really interesting people and events are covered in it. So the ideal audience is everybody, and I urge people who don't think this would be their cup of tea to just check it out and bounce around in it, and I think that you might find something that you like.
Yes, I just, as a very, very informal way of saying it, I'd say if you're interested in what's going on now in social change and the new political landscape, Bernie Sanders, AOC, all of that, then this book provides some in-depth background for you.
Yes, indeed. I think it is so much on topic for this political moment. And I think I've said it in some of the book talks I've done that I worked on this for 4 years, and when we started, it was kind of the Occupy moment of an almost impossibly utopian moment in terms of youthful rebellion and the rebellions of the dispossessed and the precarious and the thwarted and those who long for a more complete and more organic life. And by the time it came out, it was this very different moment where, as I said, a lot of the urgent task is to resist this